Our names and ID numbers are Ana Marcos A0172075, Alejandra Arzamendi A0172091, Piero Amodio A017206220, and Isabela Moreno A0172084. We'll study in the Prepa Tech Campus Santa Catarina, but we are in different classes. In this project, it's mostly about Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster and exponential functions. We will first make a brief summary of exponential function and its main characteristics. Then, we will explain what happened in Chernobyl disaster and talk about two other examples of exponential growth happening in real life. At the end, we will answer some questions about the topic and will conclude making a video of our whole research.
This is the exponential function, where a is greater than 0 and does not equal 0, and x is a real number.
This is the basic graph that represents an exponential function. Its characteristic point is in 0, 1. From here, we guide ourselves to the rest of the graph.
To find the domain and range, you have to observe the graph. The domain is a set of possible x values that will make the function work and will give you y values. The range is the resulting y values we get after substituting all the possible x values.
When a is negative, there is a reflection over the x-axis. The graph will look like this.
When x is negative or a is smaller than 1, there will be a reflection over the y-axis. The graph will look like this. This is an example of an exponential function.
The x minus 2 means that starting from the characteristic point in the basic graph, you will move 2 units to the right, because u equal it to 0, making the sign change. The plus 4 means that you will move the graph 4 units upward.
It all started in April 26, 1986 in Chernobyl, Ukraine. That date is the date of the worst accident in history of nuclear industry. It all happened in Unit 4 of a nuclear power station in Chernobyl. It was due to a human error. The operating crew was testing the turbines to check if they could produce enough energy for keeping the cooling system running. As the reactor power started to fall to 1% of normal, they started powering up, and as that happened, the power surge occurred. It started a chain reaction, and without the safety system, rupture, which led to the reactor creating the explosion. The amount of radiation released was more than the bomb of Hiroshima, 190 tons of radioactive gas released into the atmosphere. The fire lasted for 10 days. The radioactive fumes leaked for 2 weeks, and buildings of concrete shelter over the reactor took over 7 months. This was a disaster that spread over Europe and immediately affected Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. This event created a lot of deaths and sickness, so many that not even researchers were able to determine the amount. 7 million people were living in contaminated areas, and 3 million were children. Many of these people died because of lung cancer, leukemia, or cardiovascular disease, which are the main diseases caused by radiation. Even 10 days after the disaster, there was further sick of massive thermal explosion. 3 men volunteered to swim in water under leak reaction to drain the valve, which contained radioactive materials. They died some days later because of radiation exposure.
Many times, scientists will start with a number of animals and observe how the population grows. As an example, if the population doubles every 5 days, this can be represented as an exponential function. If a scientist starts with 100 bacteria in an experiment and finds that after 5 years the population has grown to 350, there is an existing equation representing the situation that helps find the number daily. In this case, it will be P equals 100e to the power of 0.25055 t, where t represents the number of days.
Calculating the population growth of a small town, city, or country. For example, the population of Monterrey was 2,687 in the year 2005, and it is growing at an annual rate of 4.5%. If this growth rate continues, what will be the population in 2019? First, you need to find the ratio in decimals, which is 1.045. Then you put an exponent to it, which is a difference of years. In this case, it is x equals 14. The rate with the exponent is going to be multiplied always by the initial amount of people. So this means it will be multiplied by 2,687. The equation will look like this. Exponential growth is an increase in number or size at a constantly growing rate. Exponential decay describes the process of reducing an amount by a consistent percentage rate over a period of time.
Nuclear energy is energy that is in the nucleus of an atom. Even though it is inexpensive and generates radioactive waste, nuclear energy is a carbon-free source of electricity. This is because no greenhouse gases are emitted. It is also very efficient and reliable because it produces a lot of electricity and does not depend on the weather. We do consider it to be a clean source of energy because it produces zero carbon emissions. Of all the energy sources, this one has perhaps the lowest impact on the environment.
We are aware that there is a nuclear energy plant in Mexico. There are 2 nuclear plants in Mexico, and both of them are in Veracruz. They're called Laguna Verde 1 and Laguna Verde 2. We think that they are safe because it has been certified by the Nuclear Regulatory Agency of Mexico, the National Commission of Nuclear Safety and Safeguards. And also, the CFE said they're not dangerous because the plants are running by the criteria of the IAEA. We do agree with the fact that our country has a nuclear plant as long as it's used in a good way because they are used to produce energy to the whole country, but it also can be used in a bad way to create nuclear bombs.
The Chernobyl disaster could have been prevented. It was not triggered by natural disasters. It was triggered by poor training, lack of safety measures and planning, and the pressure from the government to achieve results. When they performed the test run, they rushed to get it done instead of being well informed and act expecting results. They weren't able to stop the radiation spread because it was released into the atmosphere and they weren't prepared for such results to contain it from spreading. We don't think the pollution reached Mexico. It affected people's health around multiple countries, but not Mexico. The only way it had anything to do with Mexico was that they had to get rid of tons of food that were imported to Mexico. This was because before being imported, the food reached the country it came from, and once imported, they decided to avoid accidents as much as possible. An area in the Russian Federation south of Bryansk and parts of northwestern Ukraine were also contaminated. Around 115,000 local people were evacuated. The urban areas near the reactor were heavily contaminated, particularly in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine because of the radioactive materials released from the damaged reactor. The urban areas near the reactor were heavily contaminated and rapidly evacuated. With agriculture, the contamination of crops, milk, and meat with radioactive iodine was a concern in months after the accident. Some will be affected for decades. Forest food products will remain with the radioactive cesium for many years. Water bodies and fish also became contaminated. Some lakes and rivers were closed because if people or animals would go into them, their health would be severely affected. The accident immediately affected many plants and animals living within 30 kilometers of the site.
In this project, I learned that there are many situations that we don't know how to deal with, and we don't realize that many times to avoid accidents, in some cases dangerous ones, we can apply math calculations to be prepared for any results, new findings, and miscalculations. I really like this project because I got to work with classmates that weren't in my class before.
Project, I learned that nuclear power plants are important because they create energy for the cities in our country. Also, I think that if it's used in a good way, it can have a good result, but if it's used in a bad way, they can create something like a nuclear bomb. I like this project because I learned about a disaster that I didn't know in the past, and I work with new people and get to know them.
What I learned of this project is that nuclear power is really dangerous and should not be allowed, and I also really like working with new people, and I liked learning how exponential functions are applied in real life.
I really like this project because it made me realize that everything we learned
map is really useful for the real life. Also, I really like learning about the Chernobyl accident and interacting with new people. I hope we have more of these projects